GED math this time, if I'm not mistaken. I'm so happy to see
It's with
everybody.
science.
Oh, science, excuse me.
Don't freak
So,
me
yeah,
out.
science. No, we're changing your content area right now, Jenna. Are you ready? So forgive
Absolutely.
me. Yeah, so science. And we're happy to see those of you that are joining us. We may have people come in, and as they do, we'll let them in. So we'll look forward to that. But we don't want to waste anybody's time, so we'll go ahead and get started. And let me just read off a little bio for Jana, our presenter today. Jana Forsyth joined the state relationship team at GED Testing Service in January of 2020. Oh, that's just 4 months before craziness happened in the world.
For us, it was about 2 months, honestly, but yes, it was a little crazy.
She's worked in adult ed and high school equivalency assessment for more than 10 years. She brings a wealth of extensive experience in staff development, training, and education to the adult ed community of professionals to support learning and high school equivalency credentialing among adult learners. We are so grateful that you could join us, Jana, and we look forward to hearing what you have to say. So without further ado, I'll turn the time over to you.
Thank you, Lisa. Did you have anything else you wanted to add? It's the SRM?
I just wanted to welcome you all and thank you so much for helping me out today, Jana, with your presentation. If you guys have any questions, you can put them in the chat. I will monitor that for Jana. And if there's any time at the end, we'll have more opportunities for questions. So take it away.
Absolutely. And my team knows that I'm really shy about sharing any kind of bio, but this is my favorite part of the job. There's a lot of things that state relationship managers can do for all of our states. And as you know, Lisa is a really good partner for you in Utah. But for me personally, I really love professional development. So I was very pleased to accept Lisa's invitation to be here with you guys and to share a little bit about GED science with you. So I'm just going to share my screen and dive in. And I promise you, there is more than enough time for us to have entertain any questions you have. Okay, even with the 1 hour that we have, I feel strongly that we can answer some questions, or at least attempt to answer those questions. So I'm really focusing on a brief overview of science, the content of science. More importantly, the skills gap that our assessment services team identified a couple years ago that remain relevant today, some resources and strategies with you. So that's kind of my title. You can see the agenda here. It's kind of tough for me to come up with an agenda because I feel like agendas are very linear. But what you're going to find is that as we talk about the content overview, as we talk about skills gaps, the strategies are going to be sort of sprinkled throughout the conversation and a little bit more at the end. And then I'm a very strong advocate for use of the score reports. So my hope is that you have access to your student score reports, either through GD Manager or your students. And we're just going to take a quick review and lend you some food for thought around strategies about how you can use the score reports to inform student instruction where needed. Okay. And then, of course, we're going to have plenty of time for questions. So don't be shy about putting them in the chat. I'll pause every now and then to check in with Lisa. And I really appreciate your support on that, Lisa. I'm just going to move that. Okay. So in every content area, we have this sort of matrix of content topics and focusing themes that merge to show how we measure academic knowledge in each of the content areas in a given content area. And today we're talking about science. So in the science test, life science is about 40% of the test, physical science makes up about 40% of the test, and then earth and space science makes up about 20% of the test. And the way we look at that content is through our themes around how it affects human health and living systems and energy and related systems. So we could take a deep dive into this, but I think that I don't want to bore you and lose you too soon. So I'm going to leave this for you and know that as we talk about it, you're going to find that this information is explained in greater detail in our educator assessment guide, which I will mention again and refer back to again a couple of times in future slides. So as an instructor, when you're thinking about science, some food for thought Can your students evaluate whether data supports a hypothesis? Are they able to identify variables in an experimental process? Are they able to determine a method for collecting data? The ability to determine the correct process for an experiment? The ability to draw a conclusion based on scientific data? Are they able to create a hypothesis? Do they even know what a hypothesis is, right? Let's be honest. A lot of what we end up finding is that a not basic knowledge of academic vocabulary and content vocabulary comes at the core of understanding what they're reading and referring to and need to be able to analyze and respond to in terms of text. Can they design a scientific investigation based on a given hypothesis? When we think about skills gaps, our assessment services team across every content area did an analysis of all student testing. And what they came up with was, what is it that our students are underperforming? A gap is the difference between the actual performance and the expected performance. And that's across every student performance category. So we didn't identify skills gaps for just those who didn't pass the test, but the gaps for students who passed and maybe even passed well, maybe in that college and career readiness area, but they underperformed in areas that we expected them to perform well. So when a student performance on a skill doesn't match what it's expected, that is something we would consider a skills gap. Something that's pretty straightforward, but they still answered incorrectly. Or something that we consider a common skill, but it's difficult that students could, that is difficult, but that students couldn't answer correctly without more instruction. And then to think about how we can provide guidance and clarification on these skills that would help students improve their overall performance. And that was kind of the guiding principle in some of the professional development that came out of identifying these skills gaps. How the gaps were identified. Just a brief overview of the item development and assessment development process. As you know, we issue 3 new forms every year in each content area. And so the process goes something like this. There is work to be done to develop those items and passages, to identify passages that are relevant to what is going to be assessed, to write items to those passages. The assessment services team has to review and edit all of those items and passages. They then follow through to a committee review to ensure that we have done our best to eliminate bias and that the items are well written. There's a review and edit process. So if items were incomplete, meaning those questions were incomplete, then they have an opportunity to review and edit. And it goes through an expert review process before it's put into the field testing cycle. So in the field testing cycle, those items are basically embedded into the test that students take. They're not scored. The team is simply collecting data on how those items are performing. And they're analyzing that data to determine which items perform as expected and should be put in the published test for future years, or whether or not they need to be kicked out and more work needs to be done with those items. And then those items that follow through all of those processes, they go into the bank of items in which the team builds and publishes those tests every year. I mentioned the assessment guide for educators, and this is available for you on our website. It is often referred to by the assessment services team as they identified skills gaps, and you'll see that we kind of refer back to them as we talk more about the details for those science skills gaps. It gives you a lot more detail around item types and assessment targets, etc. And there is one assessment guide for each subject area for you on our website. There are some general strategies when you consider the skills gaps that we're about to discuss. And One of those strategies is to share the GED indicators and content topics with your students. You'll find all of those indicators and content topics in the assessment guide, but I also like to refer to the high impact indicators as well. So that's the area that I focused on for this particular session. And they can be used as a teaching or study guide for your students. We also recommend that you review key foundational concepts and content found in the assessment guide and the performance level descriptors to help your students understand those basic foundational skills that they can build on to succeed with the test. This is a common theme across. When I looked at all the information I saw on the skills gaps for the RLA test, science, social studies, there was one common theme, and that was to remind everyone to read carefully the questions and the excerpts and to become proficient readers, to become close readers. We're going to talk about that a little bit more in detail as well. And then again, to study key definitions and terms. This goes back to understanding content vocabulary and academic vocabulary so that students can even begin to understand what the question is asking. And when they're faced with complicated text or text that they haven't seen before, they at least have some foundational skills that can help them make sense of what they're reading. We always encourage everyone to help students read more. Strong reading skills will help them across every content level. Even though we're talking about science today, you know, those passages can be long, they can be short, there's visual text, etc. As a former ELA teacher, I used to call this deer time, like drop everything and read. And our adult learners have very busy lives, and they more than likely did not come from an environment full of media, full of magazines, newspapers, books, that kind of thing, where they would be reading for extended periods of time. And I'm probably preaching to the choir when I say part of the test is an endurance test, right? We need to build our strong reading skills, not just to read closely, but to be able to read closely for a longer period of time. We need to encourage our students to analyze the content they read on a daily basis. Strong critical thinking skills will benefit students in all 4 subject areas. And there's a whole nother professional development that we could do on close reading skills across the content areas. But all of this kind of feeds into that strategy of really not accepting that if we read it once, we're done. So let's take a closer look. High impact indicators. I'm just curious. First of all, Lisa, I should slow down and make sure there aren't any questions so far.
Yeah.
Yes, no questions, or yes, there is a question.
I'm sorry, I said not yet. No
Oh,
questions
okay.
yet. Sorry.
Okay, great. Thank you. No problem. And then I'm kind of curious, for those of you who have joined us, how many of you have heard of the high impact indicators? How many of you have used the high impact indicators? So I'll give you a moment to just kind of respond in the chat, if you will. And as you're doing that, I'm just going to mention that the high impact indicators are the biggest bang for your buck. And we do have a document for each content area. However, my favorite is this matrix or crosswalk, whichever you want to, call it. The title is Relationships Between the High Impact Indicators and Other Indicators, but I consider it sort of a matrix across every content area so that I don't have to go to each content high impact indicator document. I can look at this one document and see everything in bold is considered a high impact indicator. What is in bold? Go ahead, Lisa.
Oh, I was just going to let you know you have a diversity of answers here. It's really interesting because Jamie has not heard of them. Rebecca has heard of them but not used them. T. Warner has used them. And Libby has heard of them but never took the time to use them. So we have a real mix.
And I completely understand where you may not have the time in your day to look at them, even if you've heard us talk about them in the past. This is the one document out of all of them that I would say is worth printing off and taking a closer look, because it does synthesize all of the high impact indicators across every content area. And it creates a matrix or a relationship between what is a high impact indicator in RLA, those high impact indicators in each content area, but also those indicators in the content area related to that high impact indicator that may not be a high impact. And I'm sorry, the print is so small, but you can see vaguely on this screenshot that anything in bold is considered a high impact indicator. And anything not in bold is an indicator, meaning it may be tested. They may see it on the test, they may not, because there's no way to test everything on every form, but they need to know it. And if you're focused on these high impact indicators, then you're also helping them brush up their skills in these other indicator areas as well. So if you only have time for one document, this is the one I would pull up, print off, and take a look at, especially when you have students who are struggling to get over the line, to get where they want to be with GED. Okay. But part of the reason these were considered as high impact indicators is they often don't get enough attention in the classroom. And so I'm just going to give you one example. In RLA, there's a high impact indicator that says order sequences of events and text. And again, when I reflect on my own experience as an ELA teacher, I'm like, oh, that's text structures. That's sequencing. That's one of the more basic text structures. And so we can sometimes assume that our adult learners have that basic level of understanding because text structures are taught from elementary up. It's just how complex is the instruction as they get older. So depending on when they left school, when they left K-12, they may or may not have been exposed to more complex texts where they had to identify the order of events, right? So that's RLA. But because it's a high impact indicator, then it also impacts or helps them understand the ability to identify the chronological structure of a historical narrative and sequence steps in a process for social studies. It is also related to an indicator in science to reason from data or evidence to a conclusion. Okay, so you have data and you have to put that evidence together and draw a conclusion. And then math, and I always get questions on math, but I am not the math expert, so bear with me. But in math, there is an indicator that requires them to search for and recognize an entry point for solving a problem and plan a solution pathway. So again, if you think about it and change the terminology, we're still talking about sequencing, right? Recipes are a good example of this. Instruction manuals are a good example of this. Putting together furniture, a dresser, a desk, whatever the case may be, is another example of being able to understand the sequence of events so that it all comes together successfully. So I mentioned about close reading, being a strong reader, spending time on reading. I don't know you well, so I hope I'm preaching to the choir. I hope this is sort of not too obvious, but we're all together and it's the same community of trying to work with struggling readers. We know that struggling readers, those that fall into the not so close reader column, they often read the text once and they think they're done, they've got it, they're good, right? But they're kind of surface reading. As they're reading, their thinking tends to wander and they take the text at face value. So they're not really taking a deeper dive into making those connections to themselves, to the world, to other texts that they've read, those kinds of things. And they often ignore syntax clues. I used to call these context clues. So in order to understand unfamiliar words, they ignore the clues that help them understand text that is unfamiliar to them. And they really only understand at a surface level. Sound familiar? Post readers, however, strong readers, those folks, for any of us who taught, in K-12, we could always see those readers that were above grade level, right? Those are your close readers. This is the kind of reader we want every student to become. They don't just read it once, they read it a second time and often a third time, because each time they read, they're rereading with a different purpose. So it's great to read it once and get the general gist of the text, but then by rereading, they can dig a little bit deeper. And one strategy that I used to teach my students was, okay, we've read it once. Now this time I want you to read it again, and I want you to identify the words that you don't understand. Highlight those, just the words you don't understand. Mark the text in some way. Maybe make a note on the side of a paragraph, just one of the 4 paragraphs. Write a note of a question you have, or a connection you can make to yourself, or something else you've read or seen or experienced in some way. It could have been through a movie, a book, or a real life example. Ask questions about what you're reading. Be okay with not knowing and being curious about it, and paying attention to the language, so that when you don't understand, we can then go back and find those clues to gain better understanding of what we're reading, because so much of what is on the test is going to be unfamiliar. It's not something they see every day. And in that way, we can uncover deeper meaning, and we can help our students become stronger readers, which means when they're confronted with science texts, they have stronger critical thinking skills to really understand and respond appropriately to the questions they're being asked on the test. Wanted to just mention that all of the skills gaps we're going to talk about in science was shared in a Tuesday for Teachers webinar, which is our professional development series. Several times a year, I don't know, about maybe 8 times a year, we have professional development on Tuesdays. And for those who can't join us live, we do record them and archive them so that anyone can download and watch those recordings at any time. And all of the resources that are referred to in those sessions are also provided with that link to the recording. And a couple years ago, our assessment services team worked with our Tuesday for Teachers team to deliver very detailed, deep dive analysis of all the skills gaps. So while I'm spending an hour with you and the skills gaps is a few minutes of our time together, they spent about 70 minutes on science. They spent about the same time on social studies. For those of you, and many adult educators teach multiple content subjects. And so RLA has 3 sessions, math has 2, and all of those sessions have been archived. If you don't find them on our website, in our webinar series, then they're on our YouTube channel. And all you have to do is go to YouTube and in the search engine, put GED testing service, and you'll find our channel, and you can find the sessions, the recorded sessions on these skills gaps for you. So we're talking about science today, but even with the time we have, if you wanted more information, you would hear from the experts in that recorded session. So let's talk a little bit more about those skills gaps. Again, the team refers back to the assessment guide for educators on these skills gaps, and science does begin on page 135, and the content topics begin on page 142. So there were 3 knowledge and skills gaps that the science team identified. One was the ability to describe a data set statistically, 2, the probability of events, and 3, the ability to understand and explain non-textual scientific presentations. And Lisa, I feel like I've been remiss. I should have paused and asked if there were questions.
There are not.
Okay, good. Feel free to jump in and stop me if I get carried away. Okay, so the first gap, describe a set statistically. What does this indicator measure? It's items that are written to assess. The indicator should require test takers to calculate mean, median, and mode of a given data set with no more than 12 pieces of data. Now, right there as a student, who's been out of the classroom for a long time. And I'll be honest with you, when I was a student, I still had to look up and remind myself the difference between mean, median, and mode all the time. Okay, so understanding again that content and academic vocabulary. The gap in this indicator is the ability to calculate mean, median, and mode. And there are considerations like, will the student be given a calculator when items ask them to describe a data set statistically? And are these skills not related to a specific context or science domain? Here's just one example. Researchers collected wind speed data for a Kansas town over 12 days in January 2004. The table shows the data rounded to the nearest whole number. So we have dates and we have wind speed. What are the mean, median, and the mode of the data? Can we see any challenges our students would have in either vocabulary or how the information is presented? One challenge we know that students have across content areas, even though it was not specifically identified as a skills gap for science, is the ability to read and understand tables, charts, and graphs. So we have this table with a list of dates and speed, and then we need to be able to calculate mean, median, and mode, right? And so they need to be able to read this and understand how to apply this information in the table with calculating the mean, median, and mode. The second gap is the probability of events. What does this measure? Items are written to assess the indicators to focus on determining the probability of events. Items can require test takers to determine simple or compound probabilities, but it has to be noted that if compound probability is assessed, test takers must only be asked to determine the probability of two independent events occurring. Now, I will say if we were to piggyback this with math, in math, you see skills gaps around probability and complex probabilities in particular. Okay, so that's where those high impact indicators can be incredibly helpful so that when you're focusing on a particular skill in one content area, you can use that information across every content area and bring that content information, maybe from science, to a math lesson on probabilities or vice versa. So the gap on this indicator is that the ability to identify the probability of an event or result using a Punnett square. Now, I have to admit, at first glance, I had to remind myself what a Punnett square is because it's been a few decades since I've been in the classroom. But once I saw it, I knew exactly what it was. It was my favorite lesson in science, to be honest, because it's all about genetics, right? So there are some special considerations for this indicator that include the ability, whether or not students will be given a calculator and what kind of content knowledge is required or not required for this skill. Here's an example. Again, they gave us a Punnett square example because this one was one of the main examples that they found in their inability to calculate probabilities in science. And again, it's one of my favorite exercises in science, to be honest. I always found genes and hereditary traits to be fascinating. I'm not going to go through the process of reading all the details. I think, Lisa, we can make a PDF of the deck and share it widely if anyone is interested.
Great.
Here's another example of probability. There's some basic probability basics that we should consider. Probabilities are mathematical measures of likelihood, right? Which is why pairing this kind of exercise with math would be a great cross-content lesson. So if you roll a six-sided dice once, you have a 1 in 6 chance of getting a 6. But if you roll 2 dice at once, your chance of getting 2 6s is something along the lines of 1 in 36. And then again, we have the example of the Punnett squares. And Khan Academy, this is one of the resources that was shared with us to share with you. Khan Academy has a great lesson around Punnett squares for you as well. And the third gap is understanding and explaining non-textual scientific presentations. And this indicator measures items that were written to assess the indicators to focus on the straightforward interpretation and use of scientific data in the form of graphs, tables, and diagrams. And we find this to be a challenge again across every content area. The gap is the ability to explain what the data means and what is being shown in the diagram. And there are some special considerations. A scientific investigation may be provided with the data. Diagrams may include representations or models of scientific phenomena. And so as an example, we have this question: what statement best describes the process that occurs during digestion? We have a diagram that explains it, and then they have to be able to interpret that representation into the correct answer below. Then this is probably one of my favorite examples, being able to interpret diagrams. And, only because the example they gave us is the water cycle that the US Department of Interior posted at this website. And I don't know about you, but I would have to think twice about where to start with this diagram. It's very visual, it's very artistic, it's entertaining at first glance, but now I have to look at, do I read it from top to bottom? Do I go in a, circle, like around the clock kind of deal? What are all these words? Is there anything here I'm not familiar with? What is runoff? What is infiltration or transpiration? And so at first glance, I'm a little overwhelmed, honestly, by the visual presentation of this particular water cycle. And there are much more simple water cycles out there, but you never know what they're going to see. So they need to be able to see simple tables, charts, and graphs, and then that information presented in more complex ways. So they're not thrown off that doesn't look exactly the one way that they saw it in the classroom. Before I move on to score reports, are there any questions, any thoughts? Do these skills gaps surprise you? Are you seeing the same gaps in your students' understanding?
No comments in the chat yet.
I'm gonna give it just a few more seconds because sometimes it just takes a minute to type. Okay. So Lisa, stop me if someone speaks up, okay? I am a huge fan and advocate of the score reports. And there are two different ways you can get your hands on it. And I am not your state relationship manager for Utah. Lisa is. So I'm not sure how many of you may or may not have access to GED Manager to get your hands on the score report yourself. But if you're not able to access GED Manager, you can always have your students share their score report with you. And so we're going to take a deep dive into that. I'm hoping it's not a surprise to any of you, but our score reports are the same for both the practice test and the real, quote unquote live, operational, whatever synonym you're comfortable with, the test that they take to earn their credential. And the reason I love our score report so much is that if we look at this screen from top to bottom, first of all, you can toggle between English and Spanish. So depending on their preferred language, you can have that automatically translated. Once you have taken a look at their score, link their study material, which we're going to talk about more, then you can come up here and print their score report so you have a copy of it and take a closer look at another time. You don't have to always be in front of the computer to see it or with your student to see their report. Okay. So the score report starts with the score. This one, 157, likely to pass. Great. Link your study material. This is critical in understanding and identifying opportunities to help your students remediate skills that they underperformed when they took either the practice test or the real test. Okay. And simply by clicking change here, a pop up window comes up first with the computer based curriculum that we know of, and then with the paper or book curriculum that we know of. And all the major publishers are loaded in here. So if you're working with Essential Ed or Aztec or New Readers Press, or you use the Kaplan book, or you use McGraw-Hill Core, Common Core, it's in here for you to link the curriculum that you're using or the resources that you're using to their score report. And then when you do that, under your skills to improve checklist, you get an individualized study checklist to figure out where to start with your students who need a little bit more work, a little bit more time to remediate some skills to perform better and have a better chance of passing the real test, or maybe passing the next time they take the real test. I like to print the score report so that I can use that checklist as a roadmap for independent study, but also as a resource for coaching and counseling students who are looking at what they want to do. If they want to be better prepared for college, they might aim to score better before they take that real test so that they're better prepared for what comes next. If they're struggling to pass, then it's an opportunity to look at the study checklist and really think about what is it that we need to do next. And most programs are using more than one resource. So if I were to go back to the score report, I would say once you print off that first one, come back in here and change it to the second or third resource that you're using to get an individualized checklist for that resource as well. And then this is an opportunity for you to really consider small group learning groups. If you are printing those score reports and you cross-reference the skills checklist amongst your students, then you can begin to identify who has a common need and create those small group instruction or that one-on-one instruction within your classes. This, I'm sorry, I think I'm missing a slide. This is also an opportunity, and I don't know if Utah has really dived into this or if individual programs within Utah has really taken a close look at this, but it's also an opportunity to create accelerated path classes or focused target classes or boot camps, whatever name you want to give it, so that if you know that you have students who have passed two, but they still have two left, or maybe they only have one left, by the way, it's almost always math. You can identify those students for a more intensive study and a focus on one particular subject in an intensive period of time to get them over the hump so they have an opportunity to credential sooner rather than later and move on to their next goal. And I listened to myself this whole time and realized I fell into a really bad habit of talking really fast. So this is your opportunity to ask questions about what we shared with you today. I would not scan that QR code. I think it's an old one. I apologize. Or to raise questions about science that we didn't talk about. It's all fair game for you because we're here to talk about science and the GED test. And while you're considering that, I hope you will take us seriously because this is your time with us to entertain every question or thought. I'm also going to share with you Lisa's email address if you don't already have it. She is my friend and colleague on the state relationship management team. And if you joined us late, I'm Jonna. I had the pleasure of joining you at Lisa's request to share information with you on science, but she would be your primary contact. If you haven't met her yet, it'd be hard for me to believe, but please know that you have her contact information.
I'll send out this session, the presentation to Jeff, and he can maybe forward it on like the other day. Is that okay, Jeff?
Absolutely. We're happy to
Great.
get it out to everyone.
And I feel like the group might be small enough that if you have any thoughts, any questions, any strategies that you've used that you would like to share, we have time. I always leave plenty of time for questions, and it just kind of depends on the group as to whether or not we need that time.
Couple comments now. Rebecca mentioned that wasn't surprising that many people confuse mean, median, and mode. So that was just a comment on that. And then Jamie said that you mentioned Punnett squares, mean, median, and mode, and the water cycle. What other specific science content would you focus on?
I think there are resources out there that focus on content, like our publishing resources, right? I think that the takeaway should be relying on the skills that allow them to make sense of that content. So, content vocabulary. What is a Punnett square? What does that mean to me, right? How can I apply mean, median, and mode in my real life? Finding ways to develop their content and academic vocabulary so that they can begin to make sense of the text that they're confronted with on the test. Because there's no way for you to take a certain subject and focus on that particular subject for them to know. Background, don't get me wrong, background knowledge is always great, but if you can find a resource, and maybe we can dig up some as well to share with you in the near future, a resource to develop content vocabulary. And I think is it Kaplan? There's probably more than one big book out there and more than one resource, to be fair to all of our publishers. But I would look at the publishing content that you are using, and there was one book that I used, but it's been a long time. I think it was Kaplan, but I'm not 100% sure. Where in the beginning of the chapters, they would have a list of vocabulary relevant to that topic, whether it's social studies or science, and I would start there.
What about
So
the
if you
glossary? What about the glossary of uh, the guide,
assessment
the
guide for
assessment guide?
educators,
Mm-hmm.
of course, absolutely. Anytime you can get your hands on a list of content or academic vocabulary for science, I would start there so that you can beef up their understanding of the vocabulary, and then also develop their reading skills and their questioning, and then introduce them to a wide range of content topics that are science related. And if you are someone that teaches like science and math or science and social studies, I would find magazine articles, newspaper articles that the content may be science, but now we're asking you to manipulate in some way as a close reader, if you will, to mark up the text and ask questions, to read and reread it, and make a list of questions that you may have about the text that you're reading. There's a couple of really great resources, and I'll include a resource slide on this deck before we pass it on so that you have a couple of great websites that you can refer to for content so you don't have to do the digging. That's one of the beautiful things about our professional development team. They mine the web for free resources for you. So I'll go back and look for those links for you as well.
P. Warner also answered as an idea, recommending scientific notation, cells, ecosystem, Newton's laws, and simple machines, motion and their formulas, chemical balancing, and understanding periodic tables. Those are really good ideas too.
Absolutely. If you go back to, sorry, I'm going back to the beginning. If you go back to the focusing themes of science within these bullet points, anything like understanding what is evolution, right? But that's a very broad term. How it, the relationship of evolution and science across human health and living systems, relationships between life functions and energy intake. So this would be a good place to start too if you're looking for where to start in terms of content specific text.
Susan was saying that Kaplan actually doesn't have a vocab for each topic, and if you can remember a better source that does have that, it would be great to share.
It's a big book I used a long time ago, so I'll have to give that some thought. I didn't include it because I couldn't remember it at the time, but I'll give it some more thought. Mm-hmm.
Oh, T. Warner saying the Steckbond book has an extensive vocabulary, so that's great
They
to
do?
know.
Okay. I'm less familiar with that list. I think the content books for New Readers Press has some vocabulary in the margins, but it's been a long time since I've looked at that. I'm going to a conference this week, so hopefully Steckbond will be there, or I'll be able to take a look at a Steckbond book too. So all good resources. Other thoughts? Did everyone get Lisa's email address? Just going back to the end there. For general questions on the GED test, you can always start with help@ged.com. But if you know Lisa, she'd be more than happy to help you. I'm sorry to speak for you, Lisa, but I know you well enough to know better.
Yeah, they know. Anyone who knows me, they know. Hey, I'm here. Here for you guys. Well, this was great, Jana. Thank you so much.
No remaining questions. We have time left.
Moment.
Okay. I hate to leave you wanting, so just tell Lisa. She'll break the bad news to me.
Thank you so much, Jana and Lisa, for getting Jana with us. That's great.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. Really appreciate your time and the invitation.
Absolutely. So we'll wish everybody a happy day. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll stay on if there are any questions, but I think we'll end up here. Have a great day, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Bye.